Yes, so the other podcast is about 18 minutes, so it's good that I stopped and am putting a little podcast here of maybe just a few minutes. This table I like from the same paper that we looked at before. Looks at the summary of Middle Holocene, Indian summer monsoon variability, and cultural changes in the Indian subcontinent. It's better to refer to this region as the subcontinent because even though we keep saying Indian summer monsoon, it covers, of course, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, and so on. But generally, it's better to refer to the region, especially because Harappan civilization was in regions which are now not part of India, the international border-wise. Okay, so looking again carefully at ages from calendar years before present. So just remember, these are not BC and AD or BCE and CE. These are calendar years before present, and present is pegged to some year when this paper was published, so that line is not always very solid anyways, but few years here and there doesn't matter so much. So we'll look at civilizations, kingdoms, and dynasties and key features with related ISM intensity, keeping in mind that these reconstructions of ISM intensity are not always agreeing with each other, and there is that potential of confusing vegetation and soil moisture records with rainfall intensities or sediment data on the southern side of the southwesterly jet and the northern sides to what is stronger and weaker monsoon. We should always keep those caveats in mind, but cultural responses will tell us something about whether rainfall had increased or decreased, right? 5200 to 4500 is considered early Harappan phase, which was characterized by regionalization, agriculture-based establishment of the IVC. So we should again clarify. Right, so IVC IVC is Indus Valley Civilization. I have tried to remember everything so that when I'm recording I don't have to look them up, but obviously I'm not very successful. I'm getting old, I guess. Okay, so the early regionalization and agriculture-based establishment of the Indus Valley civilization depended on strengthened ISM. Mature Harappan phase during 4500 to 3900 BP depended on development, was characterized by development of urban centers and cities with still strong Indian summer monsoon. So agricultural productivity would have been high, allowing people to socially stratify so that people, traders, accountants, the kingdom's servants, etc., could be separated from farmers, food producers, and trading would have happened maybe in city centers, urban centers, versus rural areas. 3900 to 3300 BP, late Harappan phase, already deurbanization of the Indus Valley civilization was happening because of the weakened ISM, so that makes sense even though reconstructions may not agree in terms of exact timing. Early Vedic period included migration of late Bronze Age semi-nomadic and pastoral tribal societies of Indo-Aryan in Indus Valley, which was associated with a strengthened monsoon. So this has to be looked at a bit more carefully with multiple reconstructions or consistency with East Asian summer monsoon and African summer monsoon, for example. Middle Vedic period during 3100 to 2800 had eastward migration and permanent settling of Indo-Aryans in Ganga Plain, use of iron tools around 2900 calendar year before present. So onset of the Iron Age happened during strengthened monsoon. The late Vedic period around 2800 to 2400 before present saw expansion of agriculture, metal, commodity productions, and trades, and further eastward migration into northwestern India. But here abruptly decreased ISM strength between 2800 and 2600 calendar year BP saw the decline or the beginning of the decline of these civilizations, and there is multiple evidences for the drying during these periods. 2550 to 2295, Mahajanapada's second urbanization of the Indus Valley civilization, land taxes and establishment of trade centers, and Monsoon was still going strong or had recovered from here. We have seen that early on when we talked about it as a way of thinking about environmental determinism, because we don't know how the structural changes in societies and social stratifications would affect the societal resilience to changes in the strength of the rainfall, for example, whether the changes were related to societal changes or really to climate changes, or whether climate was the ultimate cause, with proximal causes being societal structural changes and changes in resilience inherently. 2295 to 2271 and 2271 to 2135 include Nanda dynasty and Maurya Empire. Here we see the irrigation projects and canal building. So Monsoon is still strong, but maybe they were beginning to increase agricultural production by doing these things. Increased yields with irrigation, innovation on irrigation and canals, expansion of agrarian economy, construction of dams, reservoirs, tanks, canals, and wells for irrigation, water tax for irrigation. So all these happened during strong monsoon, which shows that it was the expansion of societies, increased population, urbanization, and knowledge about how to increase agricultural yields that led to these changes, and not so much climate change, because this entire period is characterized by strong monsoon. By 2150 to 1650, disintegration of empire into smaller political regions ruled by Shungas, Satavahanas, Indo-Greeks, Shakas, Kushanas, Cheras, and Cholas. Noted great expansion of trades. Agrarian economy continued to be a source of revenue, and here monsoon was strong up to 1860 calendar years before BP, followed by abruptly declined ISM strength. So how do these disintegration of the empire happen? Is it because everybody is rich and they become fractionated because of militarization and conflicts or sharing of resources, or is it the change in rainfall that brings about breaking of empires into pieces? Those are not well explained. Maybe I should ask my friend Radha Kumar of St. Xavier's University in Mumbai, because she studies these things a lot, even though not from a climate perspective, but she will have a lot of things to say about how these disintegrations happen, I'm sure. During 1650 to 1300 BP, classical period, and Gupta dynasty, circa 320 to 550 common era. So now we are switching to common era. Makes sense, you just subtract the modern period and you get common era. This is before calendar years, and this is in common era. So here key features were literature, architecture, science, fine arts had thrived, maintenance of lakes and dams for irrigation purposes, use of water wheel for irrigation. Here monsoon was weak, so innovations in water management make sense. Major revenue source was from taxes on land and production, so agricultural productivity and changes in it would have introduced taxes and so on. Decline in Roman trade after 1650 calendar year before present was coincidental with the Great Migration period in Roman Empire and demise of the Western Roman Empire between 1700 to 1350 calendar year before present. So we were out of the Dark Ages and dealing with climate impact in Europe in terms of militarized Roman adventures. 1300 to 1750, early medieval period, development of regional states ruled by various kings, dynasties such as Chauhan, Yadava, Tomara, Chalukya, Pala, Pandyan, Hoysala, Cholla, Pallava, and Rashtrakuta. Again, fine arts philosophical system reached its epitome. Agriculture was major source of economy. monsoon was strong. India witnessed many invasions by Mahmud of Ghazni between 949 and 924 calendar year before present, and by Muiz ad-Din Muhammad Ghuri between 775 and 744 before present. These invasions for plunder were driven by economic disparity caused by persistent drought in Central Asia during this period, whereas Indian economy had flourished under good rainfall conditions. So this shows how militarization and adventures were related to local resource limitations and maybe knowledge of prosperity elsewhere, or maybe just random walks to figure out if they could find food elsewhere. 744 to 424, coming more recent times, the Delhi Sultanate of Mamluk, Khilji, Tughlaq, Sayyid and Lodi dynasties had again weakened ISM for majority of this period. So they had irrigation system which were improved with construction of lakes, wells and artificial canals. So the hydrological structures to capture water, rainwater harvesting. Market reforms 654 to 634 calendar year before present, such as establishment of a granary, centralized government run markets, and appointment market controller for strict price controls on grains were introduced. Tax on agriculture land was raised up to 50%. Both population and economy of India had significantly increased by then. So now we are dealing with demographic shifts as well as climate shifts and social measures which were trying to deal with all these things. 424 to 93 BP, Mughal Empire, big part of Indian history that gets debated a lot for various reasons, had weakened in monsoon up to 320 calendar year before present, and then gradually increasing in ISM precipitation afterwards, so more recent to 320 calendar years to 93 calendar years before present. This included agricultural reforms such as building imperial irrigation systems which increased production, agricultural production. Production of cash crops such as cotton, indigo, sugarcane, tree crops and opium were promoted under a new land revenue system. So this would involve trading. Extensive road network systems connecting towns and cities were constructed to improve the trades. Indian economy contributed 22 to 24% of the world GDP. This is addressed a lot by Mike Davis, Jared Diamond, and so on, about late Victorian holocausts and El Nino famines and so on and so forth, which we briefly mentioned before in the Holocene monsoon record. So how did countries like India and China become so poor after being so good in their GDPs and agricultural production and innovations and so on? Often colonizations are blamed for it, but then we have to also explain how we have grown since independence from colonizers. There was decline in Mughal Empire initiated after 243 calendar years before present, around 1707 Common Era, and ended with establishment of the British rule in 93 calendar year before present, around 1857 Common Era. Well, exactly 1857 Common Era. Collapse of Mughal Empire and climate crisis. The droughts led a decline in agricultural productivity and deindustrialization in India. There's a whole debate about why industrial revolution evolved in Europe and not elsewhere, whether it was geographical advantage, climatological advantage, and other advantages is not always clear. But this is a very good example of detailed discussions on how climate and cultural changes interacted with each other, showing the complexities of how climate perturbations impact cultural responses and how cultural responses depend on what already existed in terms of complexities of the social structure, hierarchies, division of labor, militarization, and knowledge of other regions. A lot of the invasions presumably would have involved some knowledge rather than just exploring luck, because if you take militaries to long distances, you have to have a plan on how you will survive along the way if you don't find any food and other resources, for example. Okay, so let's leave the Indian monsoon and Indian region here and come back to reading some more specific ideas from the book, which point out how different anthropologists and social scientists and geographers interpret the same evidences in terms of the role of climate and environmental determinism in how humans, climate, and agriculture and cultural evolutions happened over the Holocene. Okay.